the Senate is moving, and there's some wavering apparently by I will never use the phrase Republican moderates, but there's wavering apparently by a couple of people on the right, far right, and a couple of people on the far, 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 far right. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins need to know how to cover for themselves and pretend that they don't support devastating cuts in Medicaid and Planned Parenthood.
Or they just need to be seen trying to care.
They need to be seen trying to care. Everybody needs to be seen trying to care about pre-existing conditions. And Ted Cruz and Mike Lee would like to overtly make it even worse than it already is, even as Mitch McConnell quietly moves the thing to devastating effect. And you're thinking about, this is a piece of legislation that is going to affect millions of people. It's going to degrade healthcare for Americans across the board, starting with over 20 million people that will lose it. It's a vicious assault on the middle class, working class, anybody that isn't extremely wealthy. And of course, the whole point of doing it is to just give a tax giveaway to the extremely wealthy. But we've already talked about and noted that, it's a group of white men dictating a policy that will disproportionately affect poor people, women of color, children, and people of color generally. And anybody, by the way, it's also a room full of rich people, creating policy that will affect anybody that has to work for a living. It's also a group of senators that represent maybe a third of the country at most, small rural states, creating policy in a completely undemocratic and representative manner that will hit people in major coastal hubs where there is no representation of senators from places like California or New York. So next time you hear a coastal elite rap, think about that. How about the Utah elite that's about to destroy California's health system? And it's, again, entirely opaque. And this is Bernie Sanders. People have, criticized Bernie Sanders. Again, I have to say, seems to be pretty baselessly. Yes, he is criticizing the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party needs to urgently do better. This is a matter of almost national security that the Democratic Party become competent. But he has been relentlessly talking about what the Republicans are doing to health care. And here he is on Face the Nation with John Dickerson on Sunday, describing the level of secrecy that Republicans are applying to the health care bill.
To health care, you mentioned some of the policy differences, but there is a procedural debate going on about how this is being handled in the Senate. Some Democrats are suggesting because you don't know what's in the bill and the bill is being worked on in secret, to just stop all Senate business, to just shut the place down as a way to kind of force play. Are you on board with that?
John, here is the situation. We know the legislation that passed the House. It was the worst piece of legislation, frankly, against working class people that I can remember in my political life in the Congress. Throwing 23 million people off of health insurance is beyond belief. Now, in the Senate, what you have is I believe it is 10 Republicans working behind closed doors to address 1/6 of the American economy. That's what health care is. Republicans, the average Republican doesn't even know what's in that legislation. My understanding is that it will be brought forth just immediately before we have to vote on it. This is completely unacceptable. I mean, nobody can defend a process which will impact tens of millions of Americans, and nobody even knows what's in the legislation. And, John, the important point here is the reason they don't want to bring it public is because it is a disastrous bill, I suspect, similar to what passed in the House. Who is going to defend cutting Medicaid by $800 billion at the same time as you give massive tax breaks to the wealthiest 2%? So they want to keep it secret. They don't want the media involved. They don't want members of Congress involved. And at the last minute, they present it, they push it through, and that is 1/6 of the American economy and millions of people thrown off of health insurance. That is unacceptable. I believe Democrats should do everything they can to oppose that legislation in any way that we can.
Very important point at the end. Yes, Democrats need to go nuclear on this. This is the most important issue ethically, policy-wise, and from an electoral standpoint. This is the preeminent one right now. We're not even defending a robust national health care system. We're defending the significant and real gains that Obamacare did create. We have a dangerous shock doctrine predator party whose sole purpose is to destroy the well-being of Americans in a ruthless, endless quest for upward financial redistribution. That's it. And it's a clear and present danger to the well-being of almost all Americans. If you live in particularly Maine, Alaska, or Ohio, call Portman, Collins, Murkowski, and say you're watching them and you know that they need, and you appreciate their support for Medicaid, you appreciate their support for Planned Parenthood, and their moderate positions. You know, if you're in Texas or Utah, say you need to hold it up because it's not crazy and insane enough, Mike Lee or Ted Cruz. But really, call everywhere. If you have any Democrat, say this needs to be the preeminent piece of business that you're dealing with now, period. This is a major, major threat to the well-being of tens of millions of Americans, and it needs to be dealt with as such.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos